So, my favorite part. I am Lady Rain. This is the Reader's Nook, and we are on the Tommyknockers. We are reading chapter 10, and chapter 10 is quite long, like really long. Really long. So, yeah, we have all this to read, and if we get through it today, that'd be great. I don't think we're going to. I do apologize for not being here this morning. I have found that even though I'm no longer contagious and I'm doing better, I am still suffering the effects of the sleepiness. So if I can't get up, like today I didn't even get up until afternoon. My son was helping with the pups. I was that exhausted and tired. And so I do apologize if I'm not here in the morning, that is why. But I will be here in the evening. Again, I will not be reading Christmas Day, obviously. And I probably won't be reading New Year's Eve. I'm not sure about Christmas Eve. Depends on what we're doing because my husband is going to be working until only 6. So if we have plans, I won't be here. So if I don't show up, I do apologize. But they're big days for us. So, all right. We stopped last night where Gardner was being lowered by John Enders into the into this trench that they built, that they made around the ship. So we're still trying to uncover it. They say it's big, like huge. It'll fit her house so far. So it's quite big. So part 2, chapter 10, part 4. July 31st. Sunday, July 31st. Henry Buck, known to his friends as Hank, committed the last act of outright irrational craziness to take place in Haven at 11:15 on that Sunday morning. People in Haven are short-tempered, Enders had told Guard. Ruth McCausland had seen evidences of this short temper during the search for David Brown. Hot words, scuffles, a thrown punch or two. Ironically, it had always been Ruth herself. Ruth and the clear moral imperative she had always represented in these people's lives, who had prevented the search from turning into a free-for-all. Short-tempered? Crazy was probably a better word. In the shock of the becoming, the town had been like a gas-filled room, waiting only for someone to light a match, or to do something even more accidental, but just as deadly, as an explosion in a gas-filled room may be set off by an innocent delivery boy pushing a doorbell or creating a spark. That spark never came. Hi, how are you? Thank you. Yeah, we're on chapter 10, so we're almost on the third part. Getting quite interesting. They're still digging out the ship. That spark never came. Part of it was Ruth's doing, part of it was Bobbi's doing. Then after the visits to the shed, a group of a half a dozen men and one woman began to work like the hippie LSD trip guides of the 60s, helping Haven through to the end of the first difficult stage of becoming. Yes, becoming is always in quotations. Whatever it means, we're going to find out, I hope. It was well for the people of Haven that the Big Bang never did come. Well for the people of Maine, New England, perhaps for the whole continent or the whole planet. I would not be the first one to tell you. There are always planets anywhere in the universe that are not large, dead cinders floating in space because a war over who was or who was not hogging too many dryers in the local laundromat escalated into Doomsville. No one ever really knows where things will end, or if they will. And there had been a time in late June when the entire world might well have awakened to discover a terrible, world-ripping conflict was going on in an obscure Maine town. An exchange which had begun over something as deeply important as whose turn it had been to pick up the coffee break check at the Haven lunch. That is kind of crazy. Of course, we may blow up our world someday with no outside help at all, for reasons which look every bit as trivial from a standpoint of light years. From where we rotate far out in one spoke of the Milky Way, and a lesser Magellanic Cloud, whether or not the Russians invade the Iranian oil fields, or whether NATO decides to install American-made cruise missiles in West Germany, may seem every bit as important as whose turn it is to pick up the tab for 5 coffees and a like number of Danish. Maybe it all comes down to the same thing when viewed from a galactic perspective. However, that may be, the tense period in Haven really ended with the month of July. By this time, almost everyone in town had lost his teeth and had visited Bobbi's shed, communing with what waited in the green glow, had begun to experience these mutations some 10 days earlier, but had kept them secret. Considering the nature of the changes, it was probably wise, because Hank Buck's revenge on Albert Pitts Barfield was really the last act of outrageous craziness in Haven, and in that light, it probably deserves a brief mention. Hank and Pitts Barfield were part of the Thursday night poker circle at which Joe Paulson had also belonged. By July 31st, the poker games had ended, and not because the bitch Becca Paulson had gone crazy and roasted her husband. They had stopped because you can't bluff at poker when all the players are telepaths. Still, Hank held a grudge against Pitts Barfield, and the more he thought about it, the more it grew in his mind. All these years, it had been bottom dealing. Several of them suspected it. Hank could remember a night in the back room of Kyle Arkenberg's place. 7 years ago, it must have been. Playing pool with Moss Harrington, Harligan, blah. And Moss had said, "He's bottom dealing, just as sure as you're born, Hank." 6-ball to the side. Whack. The 6-ball shot into the side pocket, as if on a string. Thing is, Bastard's good at it. If he was just a little slower, I could catch him at it. That's what you think. You ought to get out in the game. Shit. Everyone else in that game is as honest as the day is long. And truth is, I can outplay most of them. 9-ball corner. Whap. Suckerly little prick is fast. He never overuses it. Just does a little if he really starts to go in the hole. You notice how he comes out every Thursday night? About even? Hank had. All the same, he had thought the whole thing was just a little buggy-boo in Moss's head. Moss was a good poker player, and he resented anyone whose money he couldn't take. But others had voiced a similar suspicion over the intervening years. And more than a few of them, some of them damned nice fellows too, fellows Hank had really enjoyed pulling a few beers and dealing a few hands with, had dropped out of the game. They did this quietly, with no fuss or bother. The possibility of that Pitts Barfield might be responsible was never hinted at. It was that they had finally gotten into the Monday night bowling league up to Bangor, and their wives didn't want them out late 2 nights a week. It was that their work schedules had changed, and they couldn't take that late night anymore. It was that winter was coming, even if it was only May, and they had to do a little work on their snowmobiles. So they dropped out, leaving the little core of 3 or 4 that had been there all along, and somehow that made it worse. Knowing those outsiders had either picked it up or smelled it as clearly as you could smell the jungle juice aroma which rose from Barfield's unwashed body most of the time. They got it. Him and Kyle and Joe had been snookered. All these years they had been snookered. After the becoming got rolling really well, Hank discovered the truth once and for all. Not only had Pitts been doing a little basement dealing, he had also, from time to time, indulged in a little discreet card making. He had picked these skills up in a long, monotonous hours of duty at the Berlin Reppel-Deppel in the months after the end of World War II. Some of these hot, muggy July nights, Hank would lie awake in bed, head aching, and imagine Pitts sitting in a nice warm farmhouse, shirt and shoes off, stinking to high heaven, and grinning a great big shit-eaten grin as he practiced cheating and dreamed of the suckers he would fleece when he got back home. Hank endured these dreams and headaches for 2 weeks, and then, one night, the answer came. He would just send old Pitts back to the Repple-Depple. That's what he would do. Some Repple-Depple anyway. A Repple-Depple may be 50 light years away, or maybe 500, or 5 million. A Repple-Depple in the Phantom Zone. And Hank knew just how to do it. He sat bolt upright in bed, grinning a huge grin. His headache was gone at last. Just what the hell is a Repple-Depple anyway, he muttered, and then decided that was the least of his problems. He got out of bed and set to work right then, at 3 in the morning. He caught up to Pitts a week after the idea had struck him. Pitts was sitting in front of Cooter's Market, tipped back in a chair and looking at the pictures in a gallery magazine. Excuse me. Looking at pictures of naked women, bottom dealing, and stinking up Repple-Depples. These were the specialties of Pitts Barfield, Hank decided. It was Sunday, overcast and hot. People saw Hank walking toward where Albert Pitts Barfield sat tipped back in his chair, work boots curled around the front rungs, checking out all those girls next door. They felt heard, the one out beating steadily. One thought beating steadily, Repple-Depple, 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 in Hank's mind. They saw the great big ghetto blaster radio he was carrying by the hand. Saw the pistol jammed into the front of his pants. And they stepped away quickly. Pitts was deeply absorbed in the gallery gatefold. It showed a great deal of a girl named Candy, whose hobbies, the magazine said, included sailing and men with hands both strong and gentle. And he looked up far too late to do anything constructive on his own behalf. Considering the size of the pistol Hank was carrying, people opined, usually without even opening their mouths, except to shovel in more food, over supper that night. It had probably been too late for poor old Pitts when he got up that Sunday morning. His chair came down with a bang. "Hey, Hank, what?" Hank pulled the gun. It was a souvenir of his own army service. A souvenir of his own army service. He had done his time in Korea, and not in any Repple-Depple either. "You just want to sit right there," Hank said, "or they're going to be washing your guts off the store window, you cheating son of a bitch." Hank, what? Hank reached inside his shirt and brought out a small pair of Borg earphones. He jacked them into the big radio, turned it on, and tossed the phones toward Pitts. "Put 'em on, Pitts. Let's see you deal your way out of this one." "Hank, please." "I ain't gonna treat you on this, Pitts," Hank said, with great sincerity. "I'll give you 5 count to put on those earphones, and then I'm gonna give you a sinus operation." "Christ, Hank! It was a fucking quarter-limit poker game," Pitts screamed. Sweat poured down his face, stained his khaki shirt. The smell of him was large, vinegary, and amazingly repugnant. 1, 2. Pitts looked around wildly. There was no one there. The street had cleared magically. There wasn't so much as a car to be seen moving on Main Street, although there were plenty slant parked in front of the market. Complete silence had fallen. In it, both he and Hank could hear the music coming from the earphones. Los Lobos wondering if the wolf would survive. "It was a lousy 3-rise quarter-limit poker game, and I hardly ever did it anyway," Pitts shrieked. "Somebody, for Christ's sake, put a halter over this guy." 3. And with a final ludicrous defiance, Pitts screamed, "And he's a sore fucking loser." 4, Hank said, and raised a service pistol. Pitts, his entire shirt now stained, nearly black with sweat, his eyes rolling, smelling like a manure pile which had just been napalmed, gave in. Okay, he screamed, and picked up the earphones. "I'm doing it, see, I'm doing it." He put the phones on, still holding the pistol on him. Hank bent over the ghetto blaster, which could play cassette tapes as well as receive AM and FM stations. The play button below the cassette holder had been taped over. Written on the tape was this one rather ominous word: "Send." Hank pushed it. Pitts started to scream. Then the scream began to fade, as if someone inside had turned down his volume. At the same time, someone seemed to be turning down his vividness, his physical coherence, his there-ness. Pitts Barfield faded like a photograph. Now his mouth was moving soundlessly. His skin was milk. A little piece of reality. A piece of reality roughly the size of a Dutch door's lower half seemed to open up behind him. There was a feeling that reality, Haven reality, had rotated on some unknowable axis, like a trick bookcase in a haunted house spoof. Behind Pitts now was an eerie black landscape. Hank's hair began to flutter about his ears. His collar stuttered with a sound like a silenced automatic weapon. The litter on the asphalt, candy wrappers, flattened cigarette packages, a couple of Humpty Dumpty potato chip bags, zoomed across the pavement and into the hole. They were drawn on the river of air which flowed into that nearly airless other place. Some of that litter went between Pitt's legs. Some, Hank thought, seemed to pass right through him. Then, suddenly, as if he himself had become as light as the litter which had been on the market's paved apron, Pitts was vacuumed into that hole. His gallery magazine went after him, pages flapping like bat wings. Good for you, fuckface, Hank thought. Now you got something to read in the Repple-Depple. Pitt's chair toppled over, scraped across the asphalt, and lodged half in and half out of that opening. A wide tunnel of air was now rushing around Hank. He bent over his radio, finger coming to rest on the stop button, and just before he pushed it, he heard a high, thin cry coming from the other place. He looked up, thinking, well, that ain't Pitts. It came again. Hilly! Hank frowned. It was a kid's voice. Kid's voice. There was something familiar about it. Something, over yet? I want to come home. There was a bright, toneless jingle on the window in Cooter's Market, which had been blown inward in the town hall explosion the previous Sunday, was now sucked outward. A glass storm flew all around Hank, leaving him miraculously untouched. Please, it's hard to breathe. Now the B&M beans on special, which had been pyramided, in the market's front window, began to fly around Hank as they were sucked through the doorway. In reality, he had somehow opened. 5-pound bags of lawn food and 10-pound bags of charcoal slithered across the pavement with dry, papery sounds. Gotta shut the sucker up, Hank thought. And as if to confirm his judgment, a can of beans slammed into the back of his head, bounced high in the air, then zoomed into that purple-black bruise. Billy! Hank hit the stop button. The doorway disappeared at once. There was a woody crunch as the chair lodged into the opening was cut in two on an almost perfect diagonal. Half the chair lay on the asphalt, the other half nowhere to be seen. Randy Kroger, the German who had owned Cooter since the late 50s, grabbed Hank and turned him around. You're paying for that display window, Buck, he said. Sure, Randy, whatever you say. Hank agreed, dazedly, rubbing the lump that was rising on the back of his head. Kroger pointed at the strange slanting half chair lying on the asphalt. You're paying for that chair, too, he announced. Strode back inside. And that was how July ended. 5. Monday, August 1st. John Leandro finished talking, knocked back the rest of his beer, and asked David Bright, so, what do you think he'll say? Bright thought for a moment. He and Leandro were in the Bounty Tavern, a wildly over-decorated banger pub with only 2 real marks in its favor. It was almost directly across the street from the editorial offices of the Bangor Daily News, and on Mondays, you could get Heineken for $1.25 a bottle. I think he'll start by telling you to hurry over to Derry and finish getting the rest of the community calendars, Wright said. Then I think he might ask you if you've thought about psychiatric help. Leandro looked absurdly crushed. He was only 24, and the last 2 stories he had covered, the disappearance, read presumed murder, of the 2 state troopers and the suicide of the 3rd, had whetted his appetite for the high voltage stuff. When stacked up against being on a grim midnight hunt for the bodies of 2 state troopers reporting on the daily AMVET's covered dish supper wasn't much. Reporting on that supper really wasn't much. He didn't want the heavy stuff to end. Bright felt almost sorry for the little twerp. Trouble was, that was what Leandro was. Being a twerp at 24 was acceptable. He was pretty sure, however, that Johnny Lorando was still going to be a twerp at 44, 64, at 84, if he lived that long. A twerp of 84 was a slightly awesome and wholly frightening idea. Bright decided to order another beer after all. I was just joking, Bright said. Then you think he will let me follow it up? No, but you just said I was joking about the psychiatric help part, Bright said patiently. That's what I was joking about. He was Peter Renault, the city editor. Bright had learned a good many years ago that city editors have one thing in common with God himself, and he suspects that Johnny Laredo was about to learn it himself very soon now. Reporters must propose, but it was city editors like Peter Renault who eventually disposed. But you have nothing to follow up, Bright said. If Haven's inner circle, those who had made a trip into Bobbi Anderson's shed, this is itchy, could have heard what Leandro said next, his life expectancy might well have sunk to days, maybe even hours. I've got Haven to follow up, was what he said, and quaffed the rest of his Heineken Dark in 3 large gulps. Everything starts there. The kid disappears in Haven. The woman dies in Haven. Rose and Gabbins are coming back from Haven. Dugan commits suicide. Why? Because he loved the McCausland woman, he says. The McCausland woman from Haven. Don't forget lovable old Gramps, Bright said. He's running around saying his grandson's disappearance was a conspiracy. I keep expecting him to start whispering about Fu Manchu and white slavery. So what is it? Leandro asked dramatically. What's going on in Haven? It is an insidious doctor. It is the insidious doctor, Bright said. His beer arrived. He no longer wanted it. He only wanted to get out of here. Bringing up lovable old Gramps had been a mistake. Thinking about lovable old Gramps had made him feel a trifle uneasy. Gramps was obviously off his rocker, but there had been something about his eyes. What? Dr. Fu Manchu. If you see Nayland Smith hanging around, I think you've got the story of the century. Bright leaned forward and whispered hoarsely, white slavery? Remember who you heard it from when you get a call from the New York Times. I don't think that's very funny, David. An 84-year-old twerp, Bright thought again. Imagine it. Or here's one, Bright said. Little green men, the invasion of the earth is already underway. See? Only no one knows it. And ta-da! No one will believe this heroic young news hawk. Reporter Robert Redford stars as John Laredo in this nail-biting saga of... The bartender wanted across and said, You want to turn it down? Lorando... Itchy. Lorando got up, his face stiff. He dropped $3 bills on the bar. Your sense of humor is adolescent, David. Or try this, Bright said dreamily. It's both Fu Manchu and green men from space. An alliance formed in hell. No one knows but you, Johnny. Lada, Barada, Nichu. Well, I don't care if Renault lets me follow it up or not, Laredo said.
We'll make spaghetti.
We'll make it here in a little bit. That must have been on his cord. Laredo said, and Bright saw that he might have twanged Johnny's strings just a little too hard. The twerp was furious. My vacation starts next Friday. I might just go down to Haven. Follow it up on my own time. Sure, Bright said, excited. He knew he should let up. Pretty soon, Lorando was probably going to try and punch him in the mouth. Got my heater on. But the guy just kept giving him openings. Sure, that's got to be part of it. Redford wouldn't take the part unless he could go it alone. The lone wolf. Klaatu, Barada, Nichu, wow. Just remember to wear your special watch when you go down there. What watch? Lorando asked, his face still angry. Oh, he was pissed, all right. But he kept leading with his chin just the same. You know, the one that sends out an ultrasonic signal that only Superman can hear when you pull out the stem, Bright said, demonstrating with his own watch and spilling a fair amount of beer onto his crotch. It goes, zzz. I don't care what Peter Renault thinks. And I don't care how many stupid jokes you make, Lorando said. You both just might have a big surprise. He started out, then turned back. And for the record, I think you're a cynical shithead with no imagination. Here we go. Having delivered his valedictory, John Lorando turned on his heel and stalked grandly out. Bright lifted his glass and tipped it toward the bartender. Let's drink to the cynical shitheads of the world, he said. We have no imagination, but we're remarkably resistant to twerpism. Whatever you say, the bartender said. He believed he had seen it all before, but then he had never tended bar, even. 6. Tuesday, August 2nd. There were 6 of them who met late that afternoon in Newt Beringer's office. It was going on 5 p.m., and the clock in the tower that looked real, but which a bird could easily have flown through, if there had been any birds left in Haven Village, still read 3:05. All 6 had spent some time in Bobby's shed. Audrey McKean was the most recent addition to their number. The others included Newt, Dick, Allison, Kyle, Hazel, and Frank Spruce. They discussed a few things they had to discuss without talking aloud. Frank Spruce asked how Bobby was. Still alive, Newt responded. No one knew any more. She might come out of the shed again. More likely she would not. Either way, they would know when it happened. Still alive, Newt responded. Okay. Discussion turned briefly to what Hank Buck had done the day before, and what Hank said he'd heard coming from the other world. None of them were much concerned with the late and not-so-great Pitts Barfield. Perhaps punishment that suited the crime. Perhaps it had been a little too extreme. Doesn't matter, it was over. Nothing had happened to Hank as a result of what he had done. He had given Randy Kroger a personal check for the broken display window and the goods that had been sucked through the hole. Hank had spiked into reality. Kroger called Northern National in Bangor to verify the check. He found it was good, and that was all he cared about. There was little they could have done about Hank, even if they had had a mind to. The town's one jail cell was in the town hall's basement, a converted storeroom where Ruth had jugged a few weekend drunks, and it might hold Hank Buck for all of 10 minutes. What are you doing? Oh. A strong 14-year-old could have broken out of it, and they couldn't very well have sent Hank up to county jail. The charge would have looked pretty odd. The alternatives available to them were simple. Let him alone, or pack him off to Altair 4. Luckily, they were able to look closely into Hank's mind and motivations. They saw that his anger and confusion were subsiding, as they were all over town. He was not apt to do anything radical again. So they took away his converted radio, asked him not to make another, and moved on to what concerned them a little bit more. Voice he claimed to have heard. Oh, I don't know why. It was David Brown, all right. Frank Spruce said now. Anybody doubt it? No one did. David Brown was on Altair 4. No one knew exactly where Altair 4 was or what it was, and they didn't much care. The words themselves came from some old movie and meant no more than the name Tommyknockers, which came from some old rhyme. What mattered, even this didn't much.
Mom, where is that big pot? The red pot?
In the fridge with rice in it. Why?
I was going to use 4 cans of beef.
No, you don't need 4 cans. 2. And you only need... Did you put the whole box in?
Not yet.
Yeah, we only need a half a box. What mattered, and even this didn't much, was that Altair 4 was a kind of cosmic warehouse, a place where all sorts of things were stored. Hank had sent Pitts there, but first he had put the smelly old son of a bitch through some half-assed sort of disintegration process. This had apparently not been the case with David Brown. Long, thoughtful silence. Yes, probably yes.
This one do, right?
Yeah. Don't turn it on yet until you get the spaghetti in. This last was not ascribable to any one person. It was a groupthink, hive-like, and complete in itself. But why? Why bother? They looked at each other with no emotion. They could feel emotion. Oh, okay, yeah, that whole thing can go in then.
What?
That whole thing can go in then.
Wait until it boils.
Yes, of course. You wait until it boils. They could feel emotion, but not over such a minor matter as this. Bring him back, Hazel said indifferently. It'll please Bryant, Marie, and Ruth. She would have wanted it. And we all did love her, and you know. Her thoughts had the tone of a woman suggesting that a friend buy her son a soft drink as a treat for being good. No, Audrey said, and they all looked toward him. It was the first time he had entered their conversation. He looked embarrassed, but pushed on anyway. Entry paper and TV station in the state'd be down here to get the story on the miracle return. Miracle return? They think he must be dead, only 4 and gone over 2 weeks now. If he shows up, it'll make too much whoop-de-doo. They were nodding now. So what would he say? And what would he say? Newt put in. When they asked him where he'd been, what would he say?
Put 4 cups.
Okay.
Of water.
All right.
By using the sink as a...
You know how to make it.
What?
You know how to make it. Now go sit until it boils. He could blank his memories, Hazel said. That we could blank his memories. And that would be no problem at all. And the press people would accept amnesia as perfectly natural under the circumstances. Yes, but that's not the problem. It was the many voices again, as one voice. They came together in a strange combination of words and images. The problem was that things had now gone too far. We can make some. Can I please read?
Okay.
You can ask Belle to make some. But first, get the spaghetti in. Yes, that's why I asked you to sit down. You're pacing, and every time you come in here, you ask me a question that makes...
Hey, why don't you take that chair? Thanks.
There's no reason for you to ask me several questions when I've answered all of them. Now, please, sit down and let me read. It's going to be like 20 minutes before it boils. What?
Where were you on November?
Not thought of. The problem was that things had now gone too far to allow anyone in town except for the most transient through travelers, or even the most of them could be discouraged with fake road construction and detour signs. The last people they wanted in Haven were a bunch of reporters and TV crews. And the clock tower wouldn't show up on film. It was a mind slide. Really, no more than a hallucination. No, David Brown was best left alone, all things considered. He would be all right for yet a while. They knew little about Altair 4, but they did know that time ran at a different speed there. On Altair 4, less than a year had passed since Earth had been flung out of the sun. So David Brown had in fact just gotten there. Of course, he still might die. Strange microbes might invade his system. Some strange Altair warehouse rat might gobble him up. Or he might die of simple shock. But he probably wouldn't. And if he died, it really wasn't very important. I have a feeling the boy might come in handy, Kyle said. How? As a diversion. What do you mean? Kyle didn't know exactly what he meant. It was only a feeling that if a spotlight were to be trained on Haven again, the way Ruth had tried to train one on the town with her damned exploding dolls, which had worked ever so much better than they were supposed to work, perhaps they could bring David Brown back and set him down somewhere different. That was done in the right way. They might gain a little bit more time here. Time was always a problem. Time to become. Yeah, I'm going to have to finish this one up, and unfortunately, holy crow, this is a long chapter. I might not even be able to read the whole chapter. For some reason, my eyes are going buggy. And it's not nice. Bear with me. Time was always a problem. Time to become. Kyle expressed these ideas in no coherent way, but the others nodded at the drift of his thoughts. It would be well to keep David Brown waiting in the wings, so to speak, a while longer. Don't let Marie know. She hasn't gone far enough in the becoming. You must hide this from Marie yet a while. All six looked around, eyes widening. That voice, weak and clear, belonged to none of them. It had come from Bobbi Anderson. Bobbi? Hazel cried, after rising from her seat. Bobbi, are you all right? How are you doing? No answer. Bobbi was gone. There was not even a feel of her left in the air. They looked at each other very cautiously, teasing each other's impressions of that thought, confirming that it had been Bobbi. Each knew that if he or she had been alone, with no confirmation available, he or she would have been dismissed in an incredibly powerful hallucination. Cover your mouth. How are we going to keep it from Marie? Allison agreed, almost angrily. We can't hide nothing from anybody else. Yes, Newt returned. We can. Not good enough yet, maybe, but we can dim down our thoughts a little. It makes them hard to see because we've been out there. Been in the shed. Bobbi's shed. We wore the headphones in Bobbi's shed and ate to become. A sigh ran gently through them. We'll have to go back, Audrey McKean said. Won't we? Yes, Kyle said. We will. It was the only time anyone spoke aloud during the entire meeting, and it marked its end. Oh, we are on 7. Okay, there's 7. I hate to do this, but at 40 minutes we're going to have to stop because my eyes just went buggy, and I don't know why. I haven't had this happen in a while. It could just be exhaustion. I'm not sure. I apologize. We got a couple sections done. We're going to start 7 tomorrow. Hopefully I'll be here in the morning. And if not, I will be here in the afternoon. I might just have to lay down, rest my eyes. I'm not sure. Because I was sitting here and I know I'm not doing well. So I do apologize. Thank you. I will see you guys soon. All right. I love y'all. Follow me if you haven't. I will see you guys tomorrow. I am going to go lay down and rest my eyes. So I will talk to you guys again soon. Love y'all. Bye.